So today's lesson is going to be about rational numbers. So you may ask, what is a rational number, or what are rational numbers? Well, the first thing that I want you to notice is when you see the word rational number, I am underlining something very important here. I am underlining the word ratio. And a ratio, if you remember, is a comparison of two numbers. So when we talk about rational numbers, we're talking about a comparison of integers. Now, remember, integers couldn't be signed numbers. They don't have to have a sign in front of them, but they could. So an example of a rational number could be 1 over 4. 1 and 4 are both integers. It could also be negative 1 over 4, because negative 1 and positive 4 are both integers. It can also be negative 18 over 6, which actually reduces to negative 3. So when we talk about rational numbers, we say that rational numbers are any number that can be written as a fraction. And then we'll talk about some examples. So I want you to think about percents. For example, 25%. Can you write that as a fraction? Well, I know that percents are numbers out of 100, so 25% is the same thing as 25 over 100, which actually reduces to 1 over 4. So percents are rational. Well, that's cool. What about fractions? Well, fractions are rational because a fraction, the definition of a rational number is any number that can be written as a fraction. What about decimals? What about the decimal 0.8? Well, I know that if I say that decimal, that's actually 8/10, which reduces to 4/5. So that decimal is also a rational number. And the unique thing about the decimal 0.8 is that it terminates, it ends. But what about the decimal 0.3 repeating? Well, if you've ever taken 1 divided by 3 and put it into a calculator, you would get something like this, right? It goes on forever and ever and ever. So 0.3 repeating is the same thing as 1/3, which is a fraction. So let's talk about decimals really fast. Decimals are rational numbers as long as they are terminating decimals or repeating decimals. Okay, so let's see, we've talked about percents, fractions, decimals. What about the square root of a perfect square? Like, what about the square root of 16? Well, the square root of 16 equals 4. 4 is the same thing as 4 over 1, which is a fraction, which means that it's rational. What about negative the square root of 25? Well, the square root of 25 is 5. That negative out front makes us turn into a negative 5, which is the same thing as negative 5 over 1. So that's also rational. So the square root of a perfect square is rational. And then we also know, like, integers, well, they're based off of integers, whole numbers, things like that. So we have an idea of what rational numbers are. So I want you to make a little chart in your notes. Hopefully you've written some of these down. Hopefully you've written several of them down. Make a chart in our notes when we talk about rational numbers. And I want you to give me examples of fractions, decimals. Make sure that you include decimals that are terminating and some that repeat. Give me some square roots of perfect squares. So I would like you to list maybe 4 of each. So 4 fractions. Make sure you include positives and negatives. 4 decimals that are terminating, 4 that are repeating, and then see if you can come up with 4 square roots of perfect squares. So that's it for types or identifying rational numbers.